start with this. Can anyone tell me what the most well-known school is, the most well-known K12 school is? Give you a hint, it's also the most popular school for all of your students. Probably top 10. I'll give you a hint, 40% of every kid in the world has read about this school. 10 points to Gryffindor, that's right. This is the most popular school in the world. And I'm mentioning this because the students have told us what they want. And we can argue over what the qualities are here, but to me, and I've talked to a lot of folks about this, to me, designers, teachers, inspiration, awe, adventure, mystery. They have teachers that make them feel safe, an incredibly badass superintendent, maybe the GOAT of superintendents. But this is something that we need to start with, is what do kids want to go to school with? And that's what I'm going to talk about here. I'm going to connect a lot of the dots we've talked about throughout the session. I want to talk about what we know, because a big theme for this talk here is when we start moving from what we know, if we start naming that, what we should be doing, then we can start to move towards how we get more done. And that's going to be a big theme of me. So my name is Craig Schiller. I'm the executive director of CHIPS, the Collaborative for High Performance Schools. We are a third-party standard, just like Lead and Well. We're specific to K12 schools. And our mission is to aspire to make every school an ideal place to learn. That's very broad. That puts me and my staff and my board in a unique position where we get across a lot of silos. In the last 2 months, I've been at conferences for public health, architecture and design, safety, security, wellness, custodial. We get to connect all those dots. And that's something that I see in this group here, is that we need to break down some of those silos and start labeling, okay, well, what do we know, what don't we know? Let's be clear on that so we can do more. All right, so I'm going to start with the students and just big picture perspective on the students. On here, every dot here represents 1 year grades. I'm going to call out the last two, 11th and 12th grade, because we're in a unique time here with our students. The 11th and 12th graders, everyone before them was born after the invention of the iPhone. So K through 10 have literally been born into a world with an iPhone in their hand. It is a brand new world. This is not the same generations of schools and educational facilities that we grew up with. The second here, these students are all able to vote in the next election. So a hypothetical question for all of you in your school districts is, what if our school districts are ranked by the number of students that voted? That's civic engagement. I heard over and over again here that passing a bond to get more done is really hard. Every couple of years, we get more voters in your community. It's a very powerful thing that we don't think about a lot, and I just want to bring it back there. So the next question is, well, do we want them to vote? Do we think they're going to be positive contributors to society? So I'm going to start with this number, 16%. There's one of the first meta-studies of classrooms in the world found that the learning environment of a classroom can contribute to 16% of a performance of a student, independent of curriculum or teacher, 16%. So, Ridgemont High, these images that we all went to school with, or most of us, and glorified in our media, these are proven to be less efficient learning for students. I mean, really. So I'm gonna go back to that number, 16%. These are 60, if you have a classroom, and for schools, if you have a classroom that looks like that, we now know that is yielding less performing students. They're learning less. If you have a teacher in your district that is used to that model and doesn't want to change their learning style, we know that is yielding less performing students. So let's just name that, we know that, because then it's a question of, okay, so how do we make that change? The other reason this is really important is because the majority of the students' time is in classrooms, and the majority of your facilities are existing, right? I'm gonna move to new construction, but we're talking about retrofits. The best way to improve a student's performance is in the classroom. Linda did a great job talking about the research-based evidence of how to do this. I'm gonna add one piece to this, and that is, again, going back to the iPhone generation, particularly after COVID and Zoom, we're used to looking at phones. Social emotional learning, interaction is something that our kids are gonna continue to struggle with. We need them not looking straight ahead or looking down. We need them to making eye contact with each other. That's a skill set. Last night, one of the K12 folks at our table said, yeah, his college students have trouble making eye contact. It's only gonna get worse. We need this type of environment to create that collaborative stuff. There's also research now that shows from an environmental standpoint what a classroom should do from lighting, acoustics, color, off-gassing, materials, from sustainability and mental health. We know this. You can argue about which furniture vendor to go through, and if you go to the next room, they won't argue with you. They'll tell you which furniture vendor to go through, but that we know what to do. It's a matter of just who. Next thing that I want to say, because this is something really important to me, is I believe every school in the country should have external shading devices. Because daylighting and views are that important to our mental health, our circadian rhythms, our focus, our stress, etc. If you don't, this is what happens. How many people have a classroom like this? Yeah. This is one of the greatest things you can do to harm your students. And I'm going to talk about mental health and safety and security at the end here. One of my favorite studies that came out here is a study on biophilic design. There's a school in Baltimore. They took a classroom that looked like this, and then they retrofitted it to have the automatic awnings. They decluttered it. They added a couple textures and elements. Students, 330% increased learning. 350% reduced stress. Next number I want to talk about, 2072. Historical trends will suggest that any school that you build today, any new construction is going to be around to this date. That's reality. I say that because 30 years ago, this movie came out. It's a classic. That opening scene is a picture of Minnesota just before Thanksgiving, ice fishing village. I don't mention I used to work at a climate change think tank. I don't use the word climate change with students. Climate change often has a past tense, it's about to happen. No, the climate's changing. To me, one of the best evidence of this is Minnesota. They have to track ice thickness. They call it ice in and ice out. It's for safety. They have to track the ice thickness so they can tell people to go do this, to go have fun. This will never happen again before Thanksgiving. It's in the past. It will never happen again. We lost 14 days in the last 30 years of ice in and outside time. So when you're planning a new facility, you need to look ahead to what 2072 is. If you're retrofitting a facility with HVAC or filtration, you need to plan ahead for 2030 and 2040 because the climate zones that ASHRAE dedicates now, those are changing regularly. That's not the only thing that's changing. Karen, you mentioned this, started to mention about disasters. I mean, Colorado was in the room, California, wildfires. Mike, you've hit tornadoes left and right. I mean, Florida, come on. Every year we're having $1 billion hurricane there. Fairfax, Maryland, I think you got one of the few places in the country that you're almost in a natural disaster free zone. You're gonna get more mosquitoes and hotter sunshine, more rain, but that's about it. This is happening every year. So when you're planning a new facility, you need to be prepared for what those disasters and increasing frequency is gonna be. And wildfires in the West, that is increasing. If you're not designing a facility that's airtight, that filters out that smoke, you're gonna lose school days. And something we know, this can be done. The buzzword resiliency or adaptation, what it means is you just plan for those events. Hurricane Ian, about a month ago. This is Babcock Ranch in Florida. It was a community that was designed to be hurricane-proof. A builder said, hey, we have hurricanes, novel idea, I'm gonna build a community that's hurricane-proof. They never lost electricity, they were net zero energy, they had solar, they had battery storage, and never got flooded. They made sure that they were prepared for, guess what, whatever Florida gets every year is hurricanes. We know how to do this. And that word resiliency, this is what it means. You have to ask your designers, don't design for a building right now, design for what the future is gonna be. And if you're not starting there, you're gonna have issues because no one, I shouldn't say that, I hope we're all here in 2072. We won't be, but the buildings will be. And so we need to plan for that. So the next thing, so the other reason that this is really important and resiliency and I'm gonna talk about net zero energy is because, I'll give you three reasons. One is, right now, 12 states have long-term net zero energy commitments. The nation has a 2050 decarbonization goal. That's 20 years before the lifespan of these buildings are gonna be done, right? So we have political commitments. So that's one. If you're building a building now, it should be aligned with whatever the current standard is, right? If you're building a building today in any of these states, it needs to be net zero ready at least to meet that goal. The second reason is 60% of our youth think climate change is an existential threat. That number is going to increase. That voting power is going to increase. The number of these states with net zero energy goals is going to increase. This is from the US Climate Alliance. They have a fact sheet on this, and it's really great. And they track all of these policies. So those are two reasons. Commitments and be responsible for our youth, which is only going to increase. I'll give you the third reason why net zero energy is important, is because if you do it right, or net zero energy ready, it's all electric. And to me, this is something that's very close to home. I have a family of lung cancer oncologists. Air pollution and what we talked about it going in our lungs was hit home. The research has finally caught up with us. Right now, 1 in 5 people, 9 million a year, die from air pollution, primarily from the combustion of fossil fuels. Now, you can talk about wildfires and the pollution that comes from, but that is being aggravated by the combustion of fossil fuels. Anyone who's driven behind a diesel bus in your school district knows that. Mike, you were talking about that. You can smell it. That smell is literally harming you. The reason I am a big proponent, and I think every school campus should be combustion-free. Everyone. And that means from the transportation, needs to be separated from the entryway, and that means all electric building. The only thing that I've heard is really hard to do, and I don't know if it exists yet, is Bunsen burners, which I totally forgot about. So if anybody wants to invent an all-electric Bunsen burner, we're not gonna make millions, we'll make thousands. So I just, and really, if you have any questions on this, I have a group of oncologists that can talk to you about the harm of this. The only way to skip this harm, particularly when you're doing an all-electric building, which will last for decades, the only way to skip this harm is to avoid combustion in your building entirely. And I'll say, I have a lot of people, oh, well, the evidence isn't quite there, but is the kitchen from yesterday, if we have a gas kitchen, it's high efficient, it's gonna vent a lot. Right, there's one, I'm gonna show you one image, and this is why we know this is true. This is one of the most widely known images, probably with like Nike and Jordan in the world. And the reason we did this is because the science was clear. You could smell it, you could feel it, you could see it. I'll give you the coronavirus, we can't smell, we can't see, we can't hear. This we can. We know the damage from both. So there's only one way to avoid that and skip past the research, and that is be combustion-free school zones. The other thing so the other benefit of going all electric and net zero free, and this is another great, I love this image, you can do some really cool stuff. We're having megawatts of battery powers being deployed in electric buses. We know that that has the potential to power your schools. If a disaster happens, we know that the school is one of the community assets, particularly in rural places where they may not have other places. If you can do net zero energy, that building can be operational. That can be a community asset and a community hub. I love this commercial for the F1 Lightning, I think is gonna be looked back as one of the milestones for the electrification movement, because this is, this car comes with a adapter to charge a Tesla, which I love. It was kind of like middle America's middle finger to Elon elitists. But this is really, like, we can do this in our schools, we know how, and it can be done. The research is here. There's all these papers. Mike, you developed the first one, the first net zero K12 school in the country. It's done, it can be done at cost. Fairfax, you did a study with Perkins Eastman. We know how to do this. So if your design team says it's gonna be too expensive to do, for them it may be true, but it's not for every design team. And so a model we know how to do this. To get more done, we need to start talking about mentorship programs where you have a design firm that knows how to do this, work with your local firm that doesn't. It can be done. Now, one of the other things we know in K12 is there is a lack of research. Every time I ask them, okay, well, has it improved the students? Has it improved their health? Has it improved the scores? Has it reduced teacher retention? All these qualitative things we talk about, is there one? Is there research? No, there's a huge lack of research. Here's my suggestion. We have a bunch of major universities right next door. A huge gap that we know here is you guys have world-class research institutions in our country. 30 of the top 50 best universities in the world are in the United States. And your districts are near many of them. Every one of those has a master's student or PhD student desperate in public health or buildings to do energy audits, research on classrooms. We know that there's a huge need for that. We need to start connecting higher ed with K12. I know, but we're separated by 2 doors and a bunch of donuts. The last thing I would say, or one of the last things, safety and security. We just had our event with Cypress Fairbanks, Roy Sprague, on safety and security. I've been to about a dozen of these events in the last year because it's a huge, important thing. We know what to do with the safety and security. If you talk to all the different parties, we know what to do here. And it starts with mental health. Mental health is the #1 issue for students. It's the #1 issue for teachers, for police chiefs, et cetera. The facility itself, and I'll go back to that biophilic design report. The facility itself is the #1 thing to boost mental health. The other thing that we know what to do here is we have to look at the data. Safety and security is not about active shooters. Active shooters in this country are the 2nd lowest death rate for students, only above high winds. It goes high winds, active shooter. 40% of deaths in this country for students are transportation related. The other ones that are just below that are bullying, suicide, and homicide. So while we talk about active shooters all the time and that is top of mind, that is not where the health and safety of the students are. So we start with mental wellness. If you want to have a conversation about safety and security, come find me. The start you have a roundtable, and it should include a mental health professional, school nurse, your teachers, a custodian, your architects, if your state has a state security office, and your police chief and a school resource officer. If you're not starting there, you're not going to do this well, and you're going to end up with something either too hardened like a prison or too inviting where they don't have the right safety features. All right, last one. The other thing we know what to do. As school district leaders, one of the biggest things you can do to have an impact is commit to third-party standards. And the reason I say that, so we are one of them, LEED, WELL, CHIPS. There are others. Code is the legal minimum for what you should build to. That is by definition what it is. What we develop are third-party industry crowdsourced. We work with designers, teachers, vendors, manufacturers, ESCOs, utilities to develop best practices. So if you're not committing to this, we know that your school isn't as good as it could be. That is a fact. The other reason, I know LEED equivalent or all these equivalents, like that is a known school. The other reason that this is important to commit to this standard is because we vet those projects. We don't let students pick their own grade. We have teachers grade them. I cannot tell you how much my team, we look at architectural plans. The amount of stuff they try to get away with is absurd. You guys don't have the time to check those plans. That's what we do. Commit to one of these. It gets a third party to review the plan and set best practices. That's one of the best things that you can do, and it's a very easy one. And I say that because my mission as part of a nonprofit is this. We need to move the conversation from what we should do to how to get more done. We talk from the federal side and the government, that's your big role with the policy changes. But as a nation, our education system is decreasing, which is hard to say because we're here saying, hey, we've done some exceptional things. And I'm not saying that we're not. What I'm saying is that we need to get those exceptional things in more places. So every time I talk about this, usually what happens is someone says, well, we're doing that, we know how. So here's if you're doing all of this, if you have one of the best school districts in the country, and you know how to scale that to your region, and you want to do that, great, come talk to me. I will quit my job tomorrow. We'll get you in the governor's chair in 2 years, Secretary of Education in 4. That is literally what we need to do. We need to scale these solutions nationwide. I'm not worried about the school districts that can do this, that have a tax base. I don't think if you have a tax base, I'm sure it's hard to get things done, but you should not be applying these federal grants. I'm worried about the folks that don't have the tax base, the ones that aren't in this room. Right? That's the schools that we need to, from an equity perspective, really focus on. And this is where I'm going to end here. That is the role of nonprofits like me and Anissa. We are literally the middle ground between vendors, state and federal policy, school districts, and designers. Right? Want to hear solutions. Our job is to be a megaphone for what works. If you as a company or as a school district have a solution, P3 financing. Our job is to literally take, okay, hey Houston, if you haven't raised a bond in 10 years, here's another option. That's our role, is to vet that. And so the last thing I'll say is, if you have solutions, if you know what works, let me know. That is our role as a nonprofit. Me and Anissa both do this. That is what our mission and our passion is. And that's it. Cool.